Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you another battle group overview, this time looking at the 716th Infantry Division, also known as the Eichenlaub-Division or Oak Leaves. Now this division is one of the divisions that I actually have really started to like a lot. I wouldn't say it's my favourite German division, but it's definitely getting there. I've really been having a lot of fun with this, not only in 1 versus 1, but 2 versus 2, 3 versus 3, and so on. It's just a very versatile deck that, although it looks like it lacks certain areas, makes up for it in others. And yeah, it's a very odd deck to play with, in that it doesn't rely much on armor at all. But I'll talk you guys through how I think it should be played and how I do play it as we proceed. So let's start off with Recon. So Recon in this deck is quite interesting because half of it just is used like infantry. But starting off, we have the Aufklärer with the 2-man infantry squad, very high optics, very good stealth, great just sort of invisible infantry unit, allowing you to spot for artillery that will be used quite a lot in this deck. Then it comes with the Cuban Mg, which is great for just either pushing a hole in the front line or using it for fire support, 600 meter range, 7HE. It's actually pretty decent. Keep it at max range though, if you're going to use it at all to like fire on enemy infantry and so on, because it can just get killed due to having no armor. It's a very, very brittle unit. Now you can get Speertrupp in this deck, but you have something better, which is the Fusiliers in Phase A. Now, most decks have Fusiliers available in Phase B, but Phase A Fusiliers are so good because they are 9-man infantry squads, which allows them to affect the front line. They can accompany like a unit of your like Grenadiers and Osttruppen alongside like an IG-18 and a pack, and literally have your recon for all of your fire support in one area, which is really, really nice. And the Fusiliers can obviously fight for themselves as well. They have 8 HE at close combat and then like 6 HE at long range. The machine gun's enough to sort of help you pin down squads, not necessarily pin down squads on their own, but yeah, just a really nice squad in general. To support your infantry at the start of the game with very high optics, and I pretty much would bring in the majority of my Fusiliers in Phase A, which is why I have them on the deck. It's very tempting to have even more in Phase B, honestly, like take out the Aufklärer and just have loads more Fusiliers, because I found them very useful, and they can be nice for ambushing forces with the 100 meter AT weapon as well. You can get BMW R75s, the motorcycles with the sidecar, but honestly, without armor, these guys are pretty useless. I think if they gave them like 1 front armor, just so they actually are survivable, then we might see them used a little bit more, but so far, just not great, honestly. Don't bring them in. Let's move on to infantry. So since this is an infantry deck, I'm going to be focusing on talking about the infantry quite a lot. In Phase A, it's all about the Osttruppen and the Grenadiers. So the Grenadiers is necessary for you needing like command units, because you can't get any command units in the support tab in this deck. So you need to rely on your infantry command, which is why I have 1 card of Grenadiers in Phase A and a card of Pioneerführer in Phase B. You don't ever really need more than 1 in each phase in any deck. So that's just the way it should be, in my opinion. As we move on, I'm taking the Osttruppen, and these guys are 20-point squads. They do have the disheartened trait, which gives them the extra suppression damage, like taken, which is kind of annoying. But either way, really, really cost-efficient squad. They have an MG34, and that allows them to engage at 400 meter range. The alternative to Osttruppen in Phase A in this deck is Grenadiers. And the only difference between Grenadiers from Osttruppen is that they lose the disheartened trait. So Grenadiers just won't be suppressed so easily. Now this doesn't matter when it comes to the infantry on this deck, because the infantry is not what's doing the damage. This deck relies mostly on its support tab and its anti-air tab, I feel, and also the artillery. So all of the fire support in general is what does the damage. Osttruppen is just there to soak it all up and prevent infantry from taking buildings that you want to hold. So that's what Osttruppen are for. Grenadiers just make that more expensive. So why take Grenadiers when Osttruppen do the job for cheaper? And that's why I have Osttruppen and 3 cards of them with 6 available each as well. That's the other thing that's a big difference, is that you get way more Osttruppen than you do Grenadiers, and you will be bringing in the majority of them in Phase A, trust me. Then I have 1 card of MG34s, the tripod mounted gun. These are 30-point squads, good for supporting your Osttruppen earlier in the game, just to stop enemy infantry advancing onto your pinned down Osttruppen. So MG34s, they have 800 meter range. Make sure you utilize that down a street or something, and then have your Osttruppen up close and personal with the 400 meter range, and you know, keep them at that distance with those guys, and then have the MG34s 400 meters further back. And that's kind of how you want to set up your infantry in like a defensive town scenario. You're not really going to be surviving very well with Osttruppen in a forest, so just don't really bother. I would suggest maybe making concessions in your lines, so that like if you have like a forest that extends from their side of the 50-50 into yours, just kind of make a concession, let them take it, and have the Osttruppen sit outside of it. Because you don't want to engage Osttruppen at 100 meter range, they will get slaughtered. That's just how it is. And therefore just keep them at a distance as best you can. That's the best advice I can give you for the Osttruppen. Then moving into Phase B, this is where things get a bit more fun. We get the Italian infantry available. These guys are pretty damn awesome. You can get a card of 4 of them in Phase B alongside what I bring in as a Pioneer Führer in Phase B. And these are 1-star veterans with the Beretta M38, which has 6HE at close range. So their close range capability is like 8HE, and their long range capability is like 6HE. And they also have the Panzerfaust. You know, pretty well-rounded squad, and really makes up the backbone of your infantry moving into Phase B and Phase C. They've removed quite a lot of the availability of this infantry, because you used to get quite a lot more of it, and I would have brought in like more of the infantry in Phase B previously, but they've made it so you have to wait till Phase C till you get the rest of it now. And compared to, say, a Grenadier squad, basically they're just better at close range. They're 5 points more, and they have a Panzerfaust as well, which is really nice. Compared to Pioneers, Pioneers are fantastic for if you need to take on infantry at close range. So for forests and stuff, this is where your Pioneers come in handy with the 2 22 HE power multi-grenades, the Gebolter Ladong, or whatever. I don't know, I completely butchered that pronunciation. But yeah, one thing I maybe would suggest is dropping the extra units in Phase B for like a card of Pioneers, or extra cards in Phase C for more Pioneers in Phase B. Because Pioneers are great for countering like flamethrower units and stuff like that, if they can get a grenade thrown before the flamethrower opens up, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so it's, in my opinion, I just prefer to bring in all of the Italian infantry. Like the 3-star Italian infantry 9-man squads can be really, really effective, honestly. But I can see why people might run out of availability moving into Phase B if you're not too careful. Osttruppen can die very quickly. You just got to make sure that you have enough fire support to keep them alive. That's the main thing with this deck. If you're running out of infantry, it's because you didn't buy enough fire support, and that's your fault, and you deserve to lose because of that. Honestly, don't focus too much on your infantry. Don't use your infantry to push alone. Make sure it's always covered with fire support. That's like the primary rule of this deck. Let's move on to tanks. So you have 6 tank tabs in this deck, like 6 packs that you can bring. I bring 4 And the reason for this is simply because their tanks are terrible. So you have the standard Panzer 35s and Panzer 39 line, a lot like the Luftlander. Cheap tanks, 50 points and 60 points. But honestly, the thing that I would be investing my points into in Phase A is the Panzer B2. Now the Panzer B2, it looks expensive and it looks kind of shit, but honestly, it's not actually that bad. It has 7 AP power and 8 front armor. It has a 9 HE power, 75mm cannon on the front of it, as you can see. Like this, how it's basically an IG-18 attached to the front of the tank. And this allows it to engage other tanks and fire support weapons like, like AT guns at that 1000 meter range and pin them down very quickly, because it does have HE value on its main gun as well. So one-on-one with like any Phase A tank, the B2 is very likely to stun it before it is stunned itself. Unless you come up against like Phase A Stug in a mirror match, or I don't know, maybe an M4 like Sherman, you're generally going to be able to stun the enemy tank very quickly. And this is also great fire support for infantry. So if you're doing well, you have your infantry in a position where they're not dying too quickly and they're not under too much pressure, you can afford to bring in a B2, which under command radius is a 2-star B2. Then has the IG-18 basically equipped to the front of it, along with the AP value and the armor. Really, really effective fire support unit. Just don't let it get popped by AT. Make sure you have enough Fusiliers to recon for AT. The primary thing that happens with this B2 that I find watching other people play and playing myself is that it will get popped by AT quite easily, because it's very slow and unmaneuverable. So if you get it into a bad spot, it will die. So it's a matter of like, make sure you have the recon to never put it in a bad spot to begin with. Now moving into Phase B, I do bring in the Befehlspanzer 35S, which are the 75-point Samur tanks. And these guys I pretty much just bring in for armored fire support in general, but also just for like command. Like their command radius is useful, right? And that's why I bring them in. You don't get any command in the support tab, so I bring it in on the tank tab, because that's pretty much all it's useful for. And then in Phase B you can also get more Panzer B2s, but I don't find I use them in Phase B, because by then they're too slow to get to the front line in time, and by the time they do get to the front line you'll be mismatched with loads of other allied armor that's way better, and it kind of loses its effectiveness moving into Phase B. However, these Befehlspanzer 35s, you keep them out of line of sight of anything armoured, and you use them to engage only like light vehicles and infantry, and then generally just they're there for the armoured command radius. In Phase C you can get loads of Panzer 35Ss. Just don't bring them in. It's a trap. 6 Panzer 35Ss won't beat anything in Phase C, trust me. Let's move on to support. So this is where the fun begins. I have 6 IG-18s available on this deck. It's pretty crazy. I always bring in like nearly every single IG-18 in Phase A. IG-18s are so strong. They have 1000 meter range with 9 HE power. They're 5-man strength, and basically they accompany your Osttruppen, your Fusiliers, and your B2s and whatever else you want to use in Phase A really well. They're just fantastic support guns, and I would always recommend bringing them in. Furthermore, they have 50 rounds, which means they don't need resupplying very often, although I do bring in 1 card of Opel Blitz munition trucks anyway. But that's mainly for MGs from the Osttruppen and also the Fusiliers. They do run out of MG ammunition quite often, so topping those up with an Opel Blitz munition truck in Phase A is often quite needed. I also have the Flammpanzer B2. This thing just looks totally awesome. I really think this is probably one of the best looking modelled tanks in the game, because it does have like all of this extra stuff on the back with like the fuel tank, and then it has the flame nozzle on the front, which yeah, does have the flaming capability of 260 meter range. So this thing is fantastic in like a town engagement. If you can keep the tank just outside of bazooka range, this thing can melt allied infantry very quickly. Just make sure it's supported on all sides by infantry, and this thing can really go to work. Really, really nice. Also on like an elevated map, these things can do a lot of damage as well. If you keep them the 260 meter range away from the edge of like where the hill goes down, when an infantry or something comes up the edge of the hill, it will get stunned and killed instantly by that napalm, and it's really, really useful for that situation. I only have one of them in the deck in Phase A available, just because there are certain situations where I find I will use this Panzer B2 over the normal B2. So yeah, that's why I have it here in Phase A, and I only use one of them. The rest of the time I'm using those slots for the IG-18s in Phase A, 6 of them, and IG-33s in Phase B. Now these are the same range as the IG-18s, but they're 27 HE and they're slightly less rate of fire. So the IG-18 has 6 rounds per minute, which is pretty nice, but the IG-33 has 3 rounds per minute, which is not great. But they have 7 strength, they have 27 HE power. Really fantastic for blowing out any infantry squad that you can think of. They will just decimate them. Really, really nice. The only trouble is that the rate of fire does let them down sometimes, and infantry can get very close to them before they're completely destroyed. Now, there is the argument in this deck that Flammenwerfers could be useful, but I just find like 2-man infantry squads get killed way too easily and way too quickly. Like, that's why I don't bring them in myself, but I could see why in like certain town maps a Flammenwerfer would be useful to, you know, kill off enemy infantry, but in my case I don't choose to bring them in. Let's move on to anti-tank. Now anti-tank things are a little bit interesting with this deck. You get really high availability on a Pak 37. This thing has 9 AP power, 10 rounds per minute rate of fire, and for 50 points is spammable about the map. I find that 4 is enough, otherwise I would take like 2 cards of them. But I have basically 1 card of Pak 37s with 1 Pak 40 available in Phase A, and the Pak 40 here is really just to deal with anything like M4 Shermans, you know, because the Pak 37 does a measly job against like M4 Shermans, whereas the Pak 40 with the 1200 meter range with 13 AP power can pop those. So if you're finding that you're up against an armored deck like the 3rd Armored and it has 2 M4A1s in Phase A, you want to maybe start with a Pak 40 instead of 2 Pak 37s. But I'd always recommend, you know, starting with at least 3 AT guns in this deck, supported by IG-18s and the rest of your infantry. Panzer Strike squads are a maybe in this deck. They have very good stealth. They're good. They're sneaky, but I just don't find a use for them really. And then moving into Phase B, I've got more Pak 40s just to hold the line in Phase B. There is the opportunity to get Mortars and even more Phase B Pak 40s, but I don't choose to bring them in. Instead, I wait for Phase C, where I bring in 2 cards of Pak 43s, and that gives me 4 availability there in total for the Pak 43 jumbo killers. So these can pretty much kill any allied armor very easily, and can be very, very useful to have. However, I rely mostly on my anti-air for AT, which is quite interesting, and I have been thinking of dropping some AT in general, just because I do rely so much on my anti-air tab, as I will show you in just a second. But yeah, the Marder 1, it's a choice if you need mobile AA, or AT, sorry. And it does have quite an effectiveness at long range against infantry with 4 HE power. So it does have its uses, but the Pak 40 has the same HE power, so I don't know. I just find that Marder 1s, like anything that like strafes this with a 50 cal can destroy it. And that's a big issue, and also it dies very easily to like rocket planes, whereas like a Pak 40 under a rocket strike will normally survive with like one man, you know, alive still, and that will allow you to like reposition your AT gun for the chance to get another kill. Whereas if a rocket strike comes in and kills a Marder 1, then it's dead, right? It's just gone, and that's the biggest difference there. Let's move on to the anti-air tab, and this kind of explains a lot. I have all of the Flak 88s available. That's pretty much my air tab, my anti-air tab. Flak 88s are one of the best, not only AP, like AT weapons, but also just like AA weapons, right? 2 Flak 88s can pretty much stun any light aircraft, and that's really, really useful for stopping pesky bombing strikes and fighters when you're trying to take air supremacy. The only issue here is that they can cost quite a bit, I guess. That's probably the main issue. Like Flak 88s cost quite a bit, 140 points each, but they can basically act as tanks. This is what you would use as your tanks. 15 AP power, 5 HE, you just roll them forwards. They're 8 km/h speed, you create a wall of these, just roll it forwards, and support it with your infantry and fire support, and you should be good, because not only can they defend themselves against air, they can defend themselves against the ground units as well. The only thing that counters Flak 88s is artillery. So off-map artillery really crushes Flak 88s really hard because they're slow and they can't get out of it. And same with just like artillery in general, like long range 2,400 meter range artillery from the Allies will crush Flak 88s. So be careful of that. You know, make sure that you are counter-battering their artillery or have something to deal with their artillery, and you should be fine. Now the other choices for AA, in phase 8, 20mm truck, I don't know, not worth ever bringing. Phase A flak fillings are something that might be a choice that I might recommend. 842 rounds per minute rate of fire with 12 HE could stun things pretty quickly. Flak 36 is also pretty decent with 1,000 meter range, allows you to hit those units and an aircraft from a distance. Phase B flak filling on a truck, way too brittle in my opinion. Once the truck dies, you lose the anti-air, and that's a big issue. So I wouldn't recommend ever bringing in the trucks. But more flak fillings in phase C and phase C in general. Yeah, I don't know. I just way prefer Flak 88s, and I find they are almost so much more effective at stunning enemy aircraft for you to take them down with your own aircraft and just stopping them in general from hitting your troops. The only change that I maybe might suggest is dropping a card elsewhere to bring in some flak fillings to support your Flak 88s, to stop them from being hit by I don't know, like light aircraft in general. Like if somebody spams like 4 aircraft at the same time, what happens with Flak 88s is they'll fire a plane until it's stunned, right? And that's going to take maybe 1-2 shots from each flak that you have on the field. And if that happens, then there's a window of opportunity for like a rocket plane or even a bomber to break through and drop bombs or rocket one of your AA emplacements. And that's the biggest problem that occurs with these Flak 88s. So you've either got to like micro them really well, or just have them like staggered so that they fire like one after the other, and they don't waste too many shots. There is like a knack to using Flak 88s that I'm really trying to get the hang of at the moment. So yeah, just be wary of that. There are situations as well where you want to use them primarily as AA and primarily as AT. So there's that to think about. So the way in which you use the Flak 88s in this deck will really affect your success moving into the late game. And that's something that is definitely worth noting. Flak 88s are very, very important in this deck, in my opinion. Let's have a look at the artillery. So artillery, I've got quite a mix here. And I'm probably going to change some stuff out on the fly because I've been trying a few things out here and there. Here we have the 50mm mortars. These guys are 40-point 700m range mortar squads. It's always useful to have at least one of these squads at the start of the game to either smoke off your infantry, which is moving into a town, for example, to get your infantry into the position you want them, or just in general to like pin down an enemy fire support squad like a machine gun or a AT gun, whatever is really being an issue for you. I also have a card of the LEFH 1419s. These guys are 1600m range 14HE, and these are really what you would use to counter that fire support properly. So you'd bring in a mortar at the start of the game to provide you normally with smoke, I would say, and then if you spot enemy fire support that needs dealing with, these LEFHs 1419s are actually pretty decent for their cost. 80 points, 1-star veterancy, 2-star veterancy with a command unit nearby, with actually quite improves their rate of fire from 4 rounds per minute. And yeah, they can be extremely useful for pinning down those pesky units. I'm not so sure about the Lorraine in Phase A. This has 27 HE power and is quite a potent artillery vehicle, but it only has 3 rounds per minute, and that really sucks, honestly. So what I'm probably going to do in my deck is drop out the Panzer Lorraine and bring in more off-map artillery for Phase C, and I'll explain that decision later. But moving into Phase B, you can get 81mm mortars with the 1200m range. I normally say that by Phase B mortars are kind of useless. You still have probably mortars left over from the Phase A tab, so just use those for smoke if you need them. The Werframmen, I do bring in at least one card of these guys because they have 25 HE power rockets, and they're great just shock and awe units for crushing like areas of towns, or maybe just killing like a emplaced AT gun, or you know, something that's just annoying you, like mortars. You know, like they have quite a decent range, 1,300m range, or yeah, quite a decent 1,300m range, which allows you to counter battery like mortars. So if you've been harassed by mortars for most of A phase and you can't get into range of them with your own mortars because they're only 700m range, bring one of these, blast them to pieces, they'll melt on the spot because the napalm rockets, and that's job done. Furthermore, you can also get 120mm mortars in Phase B with 20 HE and smoke rounds. It's tempting sometimes, but they cost too much in my opinion. I reckon if these were 100 points, then I might consider them. But for me, 110 points just a little bit too much. Just like you're using up all of your Phase B. Like you can basically pick up one of these a minute in Phase B, right? That's 2 units of mortars in Phase B for 2 of your 10 minutes available. And I don't think that's ever really worth it in my opinion. Whereas a Werframmen hits hard, very hard, for 85 points. And that really does the job for me. The reason I wouldn't take this Lorraine in Phase A as well is because of its cost. And not just its rate of fire. In Phase B you can bring in 2 more of them if you need them. In Phase C you can bring in Nebelwerfers, but I don't think they're really that useful by Phase C, and you can't get enough of them in this deck the way that I set it up for them to be super useful. And I would always prefer to bring in these BEO Kubels in Phase C as opposed to Nebelwerfers, and the reason for that is these 160 point Kubels can call in 380mm off map, which is 27 HE power, 111 meter splash damage artillery. Incredibly strong. And I've been finding I've used this sort of off-map artillery a lot in both the like Cuban Mgs and in this deck as well in Phase C, because they allow you to rush like enemy artillery very much so in this deck. That's what it's kind of used for in Phase C, I find. Like if you're being hit by priests, sextons, 25-pounder artillery, anything like that, a railroad battery can really just melt it and allow you to continue rolling forward your flak 88s unimpeded, which is the main idea of the off map on this deck. So yeah, that's the artillery tab for me, and you can consider the 176mm off map, but it's just not very effective compared to the 380mm off map, as you can probably tell by the caliber of the guns. Either way, let's move on to the air tab. And in the air tab for this one, you definitely want to be bringing in at least one Phase A fighter, which I find that I do pretty much most games. You compare this up with a Flak 88 in Phase A if you're finding that you're being overwhelmed by Spitfires. So if somebody's got a deck on the Allied side that is using multiple fighters in Phase A, probably 2, then you can ambush those with a Flak 88 and an ME-109 and maybe take the initiative in Phase A. This isn't a deck that will necessarily win air superiority throughout the game, but the idea with this deck is to not allow them to get too far ahead with their air, and at least contest the air throughout the game. So I wouldn't bring in the Ju-88 in Phase A, although you can get 14 7HE power bombs. I've tested this. I just find that it doesn't do enough damage. It definitely stuns a lot of stuff, but it's not worth a card in this deck. Moving into Phase B, I do have one card of the HS129B1s with the 12 AP power cannon, but I've been tempted to swap this out for the ME-109s with the rocket pods, the 25 HE power rocket pods, or even just more fighters, because I find this deck just needs to stop itself being hit so hard by aircraft in Phase A, for starters, which is where the ME-109 and the Flak 88 come in handy. And then as it moves on, it can sort of support itself from the air, but you don't have that much availability on any of these cards. So you need to kind of pick where you want to focus. And in my opinion, the HS129 was something that I thought was worth having, but it's mainly included for like killing armored artillery. That's like the reason I have the HS129 in there. But this could be very easily achieved as well with maybe the rocket ME-109, just for sort of pinning them very quickly and stop them killing my ME-109s, or stop them killing the Flak 88s, for example. I'm not so sure. Anyway, there's also the bomber variant. You know, if you prefer bombs over rockets, then feel free. In Phase B, I do have the 1-star veteran ME-109 G6R6, which has quite a lot of weaponry, and the idea is just that assist my ME-109 as I start to bring in more Flak 88s. I would never bring in your ME-109s before you have your Flak 88 set up, by the way, because otherwise they'll just die to an overwhelming amount of allied aircraft. Yeah, the HS129, again, wait until your Flak 88s are operational. And in Phase C, I have another card of ME-109 G6R6. This one's the 2-star veteran. You can get another one of those, but again, it takes up an extra pack. So yeah, your availability of fighters is rather low. So you can't really afford to bring in like any heavy bombers or anything that would go deep into enemy lines, because you can't defend it with aircraft. You just want to protect your own skies and just in general shoot down enemy aircraft early on. Because the Flak 88s can easily stun aircraft, but they won't shoot them down, whereas an ME-109 is there to pick up the kill. And that's the idea of them in the deck. So that's been a pretty long talk through of all of the units. Let's have a quick talk about how they complement each other and how I would suggest starting in Phase A. So in Phase A, it's pretty simple. Well, I say simple. It's more like a Fusilier Grenadier Osttruppen combo for infantry. Support that with IG-18s and Pak-37s. Like, basically you take one of each of what I just said, and those are like your little pockets of units for areas of the map you want to focus upon. And then in between those pockets, you can bring in just Fusiliers, because they do affect the front line. And that's generally what you want to do. Then you can bring in more IG-18s. I would always recommend bringing in more IG-18s before Pak-37s. Even if you're struggling with armor, like IG-18s can stun things very quickly because they have enough HE power to do that. If you're struggling with heavier armor, bring in the Pak-40 or the Flak 88 if you have that little bit of extra, cash. You can use them to pop those M4 Shermans, which are really a bane of this deck. If you are finding you're struggling against support weapons, bring in the LEFH 1419s for long range, and always bring in a mortar at the start to smoke off your advance of the Osttruppen, because the idea is to get your Osttruppen as deep as you can early enough in the game, and then just hold that position in phase A until you can start bringing up some Flak 88s to support them in phase B and C. Also, you can kind of make pushes in town areas if you support them with the Panzer B2 or the Flampanzer B2. So be wary of that as well. Those B2s, they may look mediocre tanks, but used in the right situation and kept out of line of sight of AT can be extremely effective. It's a very attritional deck. You will be using a lot of infantry and probably losing quite a lot of it, but your support weapons are your best bet. Your Flak 88s and your artillery and your support tab. That's what you're relying on in this deck. And also make sure you keep up your recon. If you're running low on Fusiliers, fill the gaps with Aufklärer. Make sure that you have those hidden recon units to allow you to have the recon information to not only spot their enemy artillery, which is probably the main counter to this deck, but also just other units in general. So there you go, guys. That's my talk through of the 716th Infantry Division. Quite a long one, but hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think of this deck in the description. Let me know your thoughts on it, what your variances are, and I look forward to reading those comments. But that's all, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.